All right, welcome back. We have our second spotlight of the day. This one is called the FBI and ransomware, and we are really grateful to be joined by Bryan Vorndran. Bryan has been with the FBI since 2003 and was named Assistant Director of the FBI Cyber Division in March 2021. Prior to that, Bryan was a special agent in charge of the New Orleans field office. He also previously led the Washington field office's Joint Terrorism Task Force, then transferred to the Baltimore field office in 2016 for leadership over cyber and counterintelligence programs. Bryan, we are thrilled to have you with us. Thank you so much. You're here today from DC. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to join everyone today.
And our moderator today is Jack Bennett, Managing Director in the cyber risk practice of Kroll. Jack's over 25 years of experience, including senior positions at the FBI, where he led the third and the sixth largest FBI field divisions. At the FBI, Jack oversaw matters including cyber, intelligence analysis, counterintelligence, violent crime, white-collar crime, counterterrorism, and much more, digital forensic labs, you name it. Jack is joining us today from San Francisco. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you. I do appreciate it, Bruce.
Really excited to hear from you guys. So, Jack, let me turn it over to you.
Sure, and I appreciate that. I know we have a large audience today, and we really appreciate everybody's time and attention. Here we are again, still in the pandemic, and hopefully we'll get back together as a group in person here in the near future. But yes, we're pretty honored to be joined by Bryan today. You don't get to be an assistant director in one of the biggest growing fields in the bureau by just being pretty. Bryan's a very seasoned professional, and I can give you in the audience just a kind of a layout of what the bureau really is, because a lot of people don't realize it is dual-hatted, which means there's a criminal element of everything that the bureau investigates, and then there's the national security side. You have the typical things in counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and the criminal aspects. But cyber is this interesting piece that kind of cuts across all the swaths of those other buckets. And Bryan is the head of the cyber division in the bureau, which is a pretty significant footprint and quite the growing continuing growing entity in that. So, Bryan, I'm going to just ask you, just kind of recap for the audience a little bit. What is the cyber division and the missions, priorities, responsibilities? Give us a kind of a high overview, wave tops of what that is.
Sure, no problem, Jack. So at its core, our cyber strategy is to impose cost, or what we say, impose risk and consequences on all of our cyber adversaries. And there's a big five. There's the criminal set, there's China, Russia, Iran, and then North Korea. And we do that through our unique authorities, our capabilities, and most importantly, our enduring partnerships. Those partnerships are vast in the interagency of the US government and vast in private sector. And so one core tenet of our strategy is that we do everything with everyone else in the interagency and with private sector, because that's how we can actually impose the most significant risk and consequences on our adversaries. I'll give you a few statutory items. Number one, I think the FBI is fantastic with long-term investigations. We have a tremendously decentralized workforce. Just in terms of cyber investigations, we have 650 special agents deployed in our field offices that just work cyber, 150 intelligence analysts, 150 computer scientists. Those are nationwide. We are the lead threat response agency in statute, which means that if there is a computer intrusion anywhere in the United States, we would have lead threat response for investigation. We also are the lead counterintelligence agency in the United States, which means that, by way of example, if Russia or China or Iran or North Korea were to compromise one of your networks, the obvious question would be, why is a state actor compromising X company's network? And counterintelligence would apply. We are a decentralized organization. We also have special agents, specially trained cyber special agents in 15 countries throughout the world. And then we have other FBI employees in 70 additional countries. So the strength and the power of what we're trying to accomplish here is through that decentralization, We can put a well-trained cyber investigator on any doorstep in this country in 1 hour. And we can do that in about 75 countries in one day. And I think that is tremendously important to the US government, but more so to the American people in terms of the capabilities and the global and national reach that we have.
Thanks for that, Bryan. I mean, you hit something that has always been a challenge for me to explain when I was still on the job is where does the FBI fit in versus DHS versus Secret Service? CISA is now a big player out there. And I think you kind of hit it a little bit about the lead investigative capabilities, but you don't do anything in a bucket. They're the partner agencies, and not only here in the United States, but globally as well. And there's always this dance between our sister agencies and who does what. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, of course. So I would structure it this way. The Secret Service and the FBI do a lot of work together on cyber investigations. There's more than enough work to go around. Secret Service traditionally and still in present day is heavily focused on financial crimes being facilitated or electronic crimes being facilitated in cyberspace. They are a tremendous partner to us, and I would hope and expect that they would say the same about the FBI. But we do an awful lot in tandem with them to include responding to cyber incidents at the same time to make sure that we're bringing the totality of the U.S. government equities and capabilities to bear. So when we tell the story about CISA's role versus law enforcement's role, we tell it this way. If your house is robbed, you would likely call law enforcement. After you get your wits about you, you would likely call an alarm company to say, what can I do to prevent this from happening again? And I think that is a good parallel to law enforcement and to CISA. CISA's role is net defense and resiliency. Our relationship with CISA is fantastic. I think we see them as mutually beneficial to our mission. And I would think that if you put their staff and their leadership on this call, they would say the FBI is an important partner and mutually beneficial to the CISA mission. So in most basic terms, CISA is responsible for asset response, which means net defense and cyber resiliency. And the FBI and Secret Service would be responsible for threat response investigation. I think two obvious questions. Question one is, why does investigation matter? Because attribution matters. And we want to, at some point, take players off the field or make their work so challenging that it's not worth their time to continue to conduct this type of crime. We do that in tremendous collaboration with Cyber Command, with NSA, with CIA, and with others. That is not an FBI unilateral show. The second question is, how are we engaging with private sector through the US government to enable net defense and resiliency? And there's really two angles to that. One is owned by NSA and one is owned by CISA, with which the FBI is plugged into. But at its most basic level, our role is to take the results of our investigations, feed those into existing apparatus, and then have, in this case, CISA provide those indicators of compromised TTPs out through their net defense resiliency relationships in private sector. So, Jack, I hope that helps frame up a little bit how we break this down.
No, it does, and everybody knows there are different pieces there. CISA is becoming, quite the player in the field, and I think that's good for everybody to understand that. So let's talk about a little bit of the year we just came through. And I'm not talking about the pandemic, but that does impact of what we have just seen. One of the watershed moments in the global ransomware players out there. It was a tough year for a lot of companies out there. I know, the Bureau has been at the forefront of a lot of these with Kaseya and SolarWinds, the Colonial Pipeline, the payment of Bitcoin for ransoms. That this has been a year like no other. And while I may see some diminished, at least from what we see at Kroll, we've done 2,000, 3,000 investigations this year. We don't see a relenting of the bad guys. We see a sophistication of the bad guys really spending time and energy with surveillance and getting into these systems. So 2021, how did the Bureau I know you guys, you just said there's a very small cadre of cyber agents in there, but the world's a big place, and I know there's partners out there from the UK and the Aussies to the BKA and even in some cases we do have some conversations with Russia and China on some, but probably not to the extent that you want. So 2021, good year, bad year for you guys right now.
Yeah. So job security, right?
Yeah, right.
So what I would say is that certainly have intimate knowledge of Colonial, JBS, Kaseya, and all the other major ones that have occurred in the last 9 to 10 months. But I'd like to take the opportunity to at least provide some baseline recommendations that we make that I think allows folks to start thinking today about what they need to do at the moment of a compromise. So number one is I would recommend that everybody start to build relationships in your cities, towns, states with the people who own the cyber ecosystem for the government. That would certainly include the FBI. It could include CISA, it could include Secret Service. In certain situations, it includes the National Guard. The second real bullet point in terms of recommendation is really develop an in-depth incident response plan and include all of those previously mentioned contacts in that plan. We really do recommend that companies, as they're working through and exercising that IR plan, do pre-work with their outside counsel and their insurance companies. So immediate engagement with the US government is, as I say, quote unquote, permissible. We generally are kept at an arm's length when outside counsel is involved. We understand that. Our simple message is this: without the totality of the information intelligence that the company has, we are in no better position to prevent someone else from being victimized. And so we would just encourage everybody to think about, if you engage today at moment of compromise, it does enable the US government to potentially prevent someone else from being victimized. And then the third item that we're really focused on is reporting. Independent of whether you report on day 1 or day 3, reporting is important so we know the totality of the ecosystem that's out there and the adversaries that we're facing. But this is an expiring clock. The sooner that we are engaged, the higher our chances are of being able to be effective. The later that we're engaged, is obviously reduced return on investment. So Jack, I'll stop there. I'll just say one other thing. Let me say one other thing. Living in this world, the interagency in the US government and the collective interaction with the private sector, both victims and infrastructure providers alike, is maturing by the week, and we are getting better and better and better. I'm thrilled to be a part of it because I think when we sit here and talk about the same topics in 2 to 3 years, the maturation of the interagency overlap with private sector is going to be really, really palatable and beneficial for the American people.
Now, Bryan, I appreciate that, and I know there's lots of questions around, ransomware, and do we pay it? Do we not pay it? I've gotten the question, on the Kroll side that, hey, if we bring the FBI into our investigations, they can get my ransomware back, right? Because they did it with Colonial Pipeline. So I'm not going to ask for the secret recipe in that, but you guys were successful in clawing back some of the Colonial Pipeline ransomware, correct?
We were. I think the public figure is somewhere around $2.3 million that we were able to recover. I'm very honest in moments like this and say two things. Number one, while the FBI may have been the face, or the Department of Justice may have been the face of announcing that operation is not possible without Colonial's immediate engagement with the U.S. government. It's not possible without NSA and Cyber Command and other very significant U.S. government partners. And so while DOJ may be the ones announcing, there's an army of agencies and private sector relationships behind that success story. I would say two other things. Number one, that $2.3 million is just one of the ones that's public. There are larger seizures that are not public, which continues to refine the interagency's effectiveness in that space. But I think the collective goal in the interagency and the private sector is if we can just make the operating environment so unwelcoming to the adversary, they're going to have to find someplace else to go to do business. And it'll start to have a very positive effect on our resiliency. The other example I would bring up, Jack, just while we're on this topic, is Yaroslav Vasinski is the individual behind the attack on Kaseya. We had attribution at the keyboard level to Vasinski within about 72 hours. I mean, that's tremendous work by the US government. And then it just does show our global reach to be able to actually get hands on him. And now he's sitting in prison overseas waiting for extradition to the United States. And we hope and expect that will be successful. But that global reach is important. The FBI in the cyberspace is no longer just about putting people in handcuffs. We're much, much more broad than that in terms of tools in the toolbox. But I think we're all honest with ourselves in saying the only way the threat gets reduced is that the operating environment for the criminals is so difficult or the adversaries are taken off the playing field.
No, that's been great work, and and I look with envy of what you guys continue to pull off. But I know that the extradition of the bad guys on the keyboard, that can be challenging sometimes because you are. I know in Russia there is this weird nation state mercenary. They plausible deniability. I think the Chinese government has teams of people that do this. So it seems like that the bureau, you guys are putting fingers in the dikes all the time, but you do have those success moments where it is painful for adversaries to realize that. And I've been involved in some of these where when they're caught, they're like, oh wow, I'm getting put on a plane to the United States and I'm going to face a U.S. court, and that could be difficult for people who are used to operating with unfettered responsibility in some of these countries.
Yep. And I would just elaborate on what you said, because I think that what you said is accurate. We certainly have, we as the government, not the FBI, certainly have extradition challenges. And I think those are all very much openly documented and published and talked about. Certainly China and Iran and Russia and North Korea are extremely, extremely difficult countries to extradite from. And there are many, many more. Two thoughts. Thought one is it's never going to stop us from trying because we still think it's a righteous mission. Number two is that when people do come back here, or people do have money seized, or there are Bitcoin tumblers that are sanctioned, right? All of these things cause doubt and sow discord in groups about, and in actors' eyes of, do I want to continue down this path? Because a lot of them are very, very young. And so if you're locked into a country and never able to travel for the rest of your life at age 20 because you've been indicted by the US government and there's a red notice on you, well, that would cause me to think, right? Is this really the path I want to go down, to be landlocked in, say, Russia for the rest of my life? Maybe the answer to that is yes, and the financial rewards for the criminal activity are high enough. But again, the more difficult we can make the operating environment and cause actors to think through why they want to be part of this, I think the better off we are. And I'll just say this, Jack, there's actually classified research between the interagency that supports the fact that it's the totality of the authorities and the capabilities within the interagency that are imposing these costs or imposing these risks and consequences. It's not the same tool every time. It's different tools every time, dedicated to a specific actor to really try to cause maximum impact.
No, that's really good to know, Bryan. Thank you for that. I think that the work you guys continue to do is impressive on that. There have been questions, and there's some legislation that's floating around out there about reporting requirements. Is there should it be 24 hours, 48 hours? Is it a week? Being on this side of the house now, a lot of times companies don't even know if their data has been compromised until there's been a deeper forensic in that. But we had talked about, what's floating out there, what's coming. Maybe you can kind of, give us a little peek behind the curtain of, what you're seeing. Because I know as an assistant director, you are often called up on the Hill to provide testimony to the legislation as to, hey, what the Bureau is doing and what we're seeing. But you also hear, and your staff also understands, there may be some things that are coming out there that we should be aware of.
Sure. I think that there is tremendous momentum right now out of, I believe, Senator Portman and Senator Peters' office and his GAC committee, the his GAC committee, and I do believe that they likely have the leading language in terms of a bill, and they're probably looking for a vehicle to push it through into law. My understanding, at least, is that most likely it would be a time horizon of about 72 hours for reporting. Listen, there's a lot of opinions on that 72 hours. I think that if the goal of the legislation is to encourage reporting and gain data, then I think 72 hours is fine. I think if the goal of the legislation is to encourage reporting for the sake of being able to do something to benefit victims in that moment, then I do think 72 hours is likely too long. And then I think that likely the central repository for collection will likely be CISA. And we are collectively fine with that. We would expect that FBI would have real-time unfettered access to that data set, which really just goes back to the strength of our decentralized workforce and being able to get a meaningful individual, a trained individual into a company's doorstep within an hour. And we think there's tremendous power in that, because my experience in the last 9 to 10 months with this threat set is that this is still about people. This is not about cyber. This is still about people. This is about people having a really bad day and wanting somebody to lean on at a time of need, whether that's press statements, whether that's understanding who's behind their bad day. And the FBI is just simply fantastic in the victim space. And so that decentralized workforce being enabled by that cyber incident reporting legislation, I think, is crucial to the American people's well-being.
No, and you just mentioned a couple of words that really kind of resonate with me, even when I was on the desk. We would get calls from companies, and I think it's important that to this audience, we let people know that the Bureau sees companies that are having that bad day as the victim. So they're not going to come in and hook things up to your networks and start, demanding with subpoenas on that. It really is in my experience, and I'm sure you see it too, it's a partnership with the victim companies, and you have outside counsel, and you have digital forensic firms, and everybody starts working together. But the Bureau sees people having a bad day as victims, correct?
It is, Jack. And, we continue to be asked routinely common questions. Well, how do we protect personally identifiable information on a network? How do we protect customer data on a network? How do we protect IP? And I would just push us back to kind of my second point. After you build a relationship with the government in a city or town, when you begin to develop and exercise that incident response plan, I really think working through those questions with outside counsel in the planning stage and not in the crisis stage is paramount and really, really important to success. There are hundreds of victims that are part of the same adversarial attack. So, for example, Sodinikibi, also known as Revil, was behind the Kaseya attack. The number of victims globally is numbers in the thousands. So the chances of your piece of evidence or your piece of information coming into play in public dissemination is very, very low because of the totality of what we're trying to collect.
No, and I think that is, we even recommend, get to know the people that you should call in that incident response plan early on. And part of that is the FBI. If you think you're gonna pick the phone up and just call the 800 number for your local FBI office, they're like any big company, there's a switchboard there. But if you get to know the cyber agents, the cyber supervisors, and have their phone numbers in your Rolodex, then that is a much quicker conversation than trying to navigate a bureaucracy as big as the Bureau. I think that every field division, the 56 in the United States, and then the overseas offices too, they have cyber capabilities. And if the audience is looking to speak with somebody from the FBI, really kind of, when you pick the phone up and you need to call them, if you don't have a contact, find the cyber ASAC or the SAC and talk to them about what's going on, because I think that the people that are really specific to the cyber mission are the ones you want to talk to. The gang guy that's on the phone probably is not going to be really helpful, but the cyber people speak the language. And I see Bruce popping up. That cannot be our session that quick. It is. I said I want to thank Bryan for his help on here. I do hope you feel better. I know you're feeling a little under the weather. I'll let everybody else make assumptions of what that is, and not to divulge your personal medical history here. But I do hope you feel better in the next couple of days. Bruce, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Jack. Terrific job moderating. And Bryan, that was really valuable, and I'm sure all of our attendees really enjoyed hearing from you today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So our final panel is really an interesting one. It's called it's a policy discussion, how to stop the ransomware pandemic. So we'll figure all that out in 5 minutes at 2:00. See you then.